everyone. Does it sound okay? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are joining us from. I'm Khurshid Navdar, and on behalf of the Zoroastrian Association of Greater New York, it is my proud privilege to welcome you all to our 4th annual Kakashru and Irani lecture series. This annual event, organized by ZAGNY, is to commemorate the life and work of Kaikhosrow with lectures on topics that were close to his heart. Some of us are gathered here today in the library of our beautiful Darvemer, and we are thrilled to welcome so many of you joining us virtually. I'd like to take a few minutes to give a brief glimpse of the life of our beloved professor for those in our audience who might not have had the pleasure of meeting this remarkable man. Kakashru and Irani, better known to us in our academic circle as KD, was born on the 1st of May, 1922 in Mumbai, India. He was the elder of 2 sons to Dinshaw Jijibai Irani and Banu Mithibai Sethna. He studied chemistry and physics. During the war years, he studied law and even briefly practiced at his father's law firm. He met his future wife, Piroja, who was a fellow clerk in that law firm. Then at the age of 25, Kakashru came to the United States and studied at the Princeton Institute of Physics, where he had the opportunity to have many interactions with Albert Einstein. It was actually Einstein's letter of recommendation, or actually a handwritten scribbled note, as he would say, that led him to get appointed to City College of CUNY, the City University of New York, where he had an incredible career spanning 6 decades, touching and inspiring generations of students. As a fellow academician in the CUNY system, upon knowing that yours truly is also a Zoroastrian, I was often asked, "Oh, then you must know KD." Yes, he was very popular and well known within the CUNY circle. KD was one of those rare individuals whose unique background and interests allowed him to understand on one hand the work of Einstein and on the other that of German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and he successfully applied both areas of knowledge to his chosen field, and that was the philosophy of science. He also applied those philosophical analyses to Zoroastrian scriptures. Ethics was another area that was very dear to him, and our keynote speaker today will educate us further upon this topic. While most of us at ZAGNY did not take KD's philosophy or ethics classes, we were extremely privileged to have him give many lectures and talks right here in our Darvemer on Zoroastrianism. He could speak on one hand alongside intellectuals and experts on religion, and at the same time had the ability to simplify his talks for lay people like me on complex topics like understanding the true essence of our Godhead. His humility, wit, and sense of humor added to his charm in making him an immensely engaging speaker. Our beloved professor passed away on June 29th, 2017, at the age of 95. What you see, can you go back, Arzan? Sorry. This slide here is just 3 months before his death, when we were fortunate to have him give a talk. He spoke for an hour without notes. Yes, at the age of 95. He was a born teacher and truly enjoyed educating a good audience. Katie was a unique treasure to our Zoroastrian community, and we at ZAGNY have been so very, very fortunate to have had amidst us. So having given you a brief glimpse as to who the man was, we're going to now go ahead and I'm going to take you through the agenda. We will have a presentation by Fromrose, who will tell you a little more about Kakashru. We will then have the status of his estate presented to us by our attorney, Alicia. Then we get to the keynote address. We'll have friends of Kakashru then share their personal experiences, provide a brief update on the cataloging of his collection, and then close. So now, folks, it is my proud pleasure to welcome and invite Kakashru's longtime friend, Fromrose K. Patel, who is also a trustee of their estate. Next slide, please, Amsa. Fromrose, better known to some of you as Freddie, is a long-standing and respected ZAGNY member. He has served ZAGNY as a board member for several years and has been a past president. He has also served as the president of FEZANA, the Federation of Zoroastrian Associations of North America, for 2 terms. Fromrose, an accountant by profession, has been ZAGNY's only pro bono accountant for the past 47 years and also reviews the books of accounts for many other nonprofits, including FEZANA and other Zoroastrian associations in North America. Of course, all this is pro bono. A true stalwart of our ZAGNY community, always helping others behind the scenes and taking on many noble causes, such as raising funds for the benefit of the Surat Parsi orphanage. Please join me in welcoming Professor Irani's longtime friend, Fromrose K. Patel. Fromrose.
Good morning, fellow Jarthostis, friends of Piroja and Kakashru Irani. It is my distinct privilege and an honor to talk about my good friend Kaikhosrow Irani. There are 2 maxims that describe the lives of Piroja and Kakashru. The prophet Zarathustra refers to the righteous individuals such as Kakashru as Ahura Mazda's helper. The Bhagavad Gita refers to the virtual souls as Karma Yogi. Kakashru fits both the descriptions. According to the prophet, our role is to make the world progress towards perfection. According to Hinduism, Karma Yoga is the path of the selfless action. It teaches that the truth seeker act according to dharma without being attached to the fruits or the personal consequences. It leads one to consider dharma of work and work according to one's dharma, doing the God's work. Both Zoroastrian faith and Bhagavad Gita emphasizes the notion of the truth and the concept of helping fellow human beings. However, Neither Zoroastrianism nor Bhagavad Gita provides a prescriptive commandment, and both make it plain to their adherents that your actions will have consequences. Prophet Zarathustra states, "Hearken with your ears to the best counsel, and happiness is the lot of who works for the happiness of others." Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, every effortless act, Arjuna, is born of Brahman, the eternal, infinite Godhead. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world, and by devotion to selfless work, one attains the supreme goal of life. Both great traditions offer an advice, but not the prescription. Whenever I sought Kakashrow's counsel, he would say, "Let us see what a rational person should do." And quietly he would inject in a very low tone words like, "Hearken with your ears, reflect upon them." But I was looking for some advice, like of which Lord Krishna gave to Arjuna. I would ask for an advice, and what I will get is diplomatic words, but no dictation, no dictum, no degree, no fatwa, no do it as I said. That was a style of Kakashru, no dictation. There were 3 instances relative to my association with the Zoroastrian community where my actions were controversial, to say the least. My action or lack of action brought Zoroastrian community to the brink. KD's advice was, when you are at the crossroad, it is not enough to do what is legally right, but morally right. Let me repeat, it is not enough to do what is legally right, but morally right. I am ashamed to admit that I took the easy way out. What I did was legally right, but not morally. I will have to bear the cross for my moral failure. When Gandhiji was thrown out of a railway platform, when Gandhiji was thrown on a railway platform by a white policeman in South Africa, even though he had a valid ticket to travel in the first class compartment, he took a high road, ignoring the incident, and completely immersed himself to take up the cause of the Indians in South Africa who were denied their fundamental human rights. On returning to India, Gandhiji once again did what was morally correct. Bapu led the nation for the just cause of Swarajya now. As you know, rest is history. The karma yogi that he was, he did not expect any reward. On August 15th, 1947, Gandhiji spent the night in a humble hut owned by a Muslim family. He was not in New Delhi in a government bungalow. He was in a riot-torn Kolkata to bring peace to the city, where for over a year Muslims and Hindus have been thirsty for each other's blood. During the civil rights struggle, the Jews and the Christians were morally justified to run Underground Railroad, offering shelter and aid to the escaped enslaved people from the South. Vinoba Bhave, Jai Prakash Narayan, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Harry S. Truman, Lyndon B. Johnson, Thurgood Marshall, Ruth Ginsburg, and scores of freedom writers were morally justified to protest against the unjust laws because it was right thing to do. Let me repeat, because it was the right thing to do. Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist and a member of Nazi Party, is credited to have saving the lives of 1,500 Jews during Holocaust. Without any doubt, this was the most courageous and morally principled act. Sir Jamsetji Jijibai, in addition to starting charities such as schools, hospitals, and public housing, established communal wells over the Bombay Presidency so that untouchables, known as Harijans, could have the access to the drinking water. Remember, access to the drinking water. These righteous souls did what was required of them to make the world progress towards perfection. Kakashru was not a Jarthosi high priest. He was not a Pramukh Swami. He was not a bishop. He was not a cardinal or ayatollah or Varamullaji. He was not a patriot. He was not a patriarch of a dynasty. He was a righteous, humble, worthy of reverence human being. He was not interested in judging his fellow human beings. He was as comfortable in the company of the 5-year-old as he was in the company of the scholars. The sole purpose of his life was to lead you to hearken with and the advice of the Prophet. He had no use for the so-called doctrinal and theological restrictions as to who can and who cannot practice the religion of the Prophet. In the truest sense, Kakashru was Aura Mazda's helper and Karma Yogi par excellence. My life was enriched by his association. Thank you for listening, and may his soul guide us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you really for those amazing words. We should find Alicia and make her the co-host for the next segment. I'd like to now introduce you all to Alicia J Ragusa. She's an attorney with 22 years of holistic law practice experience that focuses on estate planning. In the summer of 2005, Ms. Ragusa was retained by Kaikhosrow and Piroja, and she continues as a loyal counselor to their estate. It has been an absolute pleasure to get to know her, and she has been ever so instrumental to us every single step of the way. And we cannot thank her enough for all her efforts. Today, Alicia will share a brief update of their estate. Alicia?
Alicia, please unmute yourself.
Okay, great, thank you. We've been doing this for 2 years now, and I'm still learning every day. So thank you. Thank you so much, Khurshid. I appreciate that introduction, and good morning. Thank you for inviting me to share with you a brief overview of Professor and Mrs. Irani's estate. I'm very sorry that I'm not there with you in person to memorialize Professor Irani. This annual educational event is the perfect example of Professor and Mrs. Irani's legacy and their vision for their estate. On behalf of the trustee, Framrose Patel, and the executor, Zareen Whale, I am pleased to inform you that by year end, the work of the estate will be complete. We are humbled and happily surprised that we were able to so quickly and thoroughly honor the wishes of the Iranis. The focus and dedication of the fiduciaries, the cooperation with the Zoroastrian community, and the unique relationship with City College enabled us to forge a path to continue the Irani's life's work. Our work aligned with their values. In December of 2018, a majority of the estate comprised of the Irani's personal belongings, amassed in their home of over 50 years, was donated to charity. Professor Irani's professional work, library, and artifacts were donated to City College, where he spent his more than 60-year career delighting students. This included 150 bankers' boxes of books and 40 bankers' boxes of archival material that served as the basis of the Irani archive. Not to be outdone were the 10 bankers' boxes of Mrs. Irani's culinary books that were donated to the Kitchen Arts and Letters. I would like to point out Zareen's vision that the terms of the archive must provide the Zoroastrian community with unfettered access to the professionally cataloged and digitized collection, including, of course, Professor Irani's religious papers. Later in the program, you will hear from the dedicated Professor Van Noort and her team about the archive and their amazing progress that they made throughout the pandemic. In the coming months, you will be able to access this information through an online search engine and use the materials for your own academic and religious pursuits. And in the near future, we will share with you a web link for that access. On the last day, the last business day of 2020, the New York State Attorney General's Charities Bureau gave us formal approval on the financial transactions of the trust. Ordinarily, formal approval of a trust with this level of complexity would take nearly double the time and expense. However, we attribute the speediness to our determination and the meticulous record keeping of our unofficial CPA, Framrose, and of course our official CPA, Noel Silverman. As a result, by the spring of 2021, we had the authority to make the final trust distributions to the Zoroastrian charities. We are pleased to know that these funds will support the good work of the organizations and, in keeping with the life mission of the Iranis, that they will be directed solely towards educational purposes such as this phenomenal event. It was the Iranis' intention that these funds would be channeled to continue their life's work of furthering knowledge, education, and the eternal message of the prophet Zarathustra. We are confident that the leaders of the Zoroastrian community are shepherding these funds to enhance the noble causes to which the Iranis devoted their lives, and we are grateful for their continued efforts. We are honored to have worked tirelessly in a labor of love to secure the legacy of Professor and Mrs. Irani, and I thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alicia. And now, next slide, please, Farzan. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce you all to our keynote speaker, Cyrus D. Mehta, Managing Partner of Cyrus D. Mehta and Partners, and a highly regarded law firm specializing in immigration law. Cyrus is a graduate of Cambridge University and Columbia Law School. He's also an adjunct professor at the Brooklyn School of Law. Cyrus has a very impressive CV. As you can see, he has received numerous awards for advancing the practice of immigration and for his outstanding efforts in providing pro bono representation in the immigration field. In addition to managing a busy law firm, he is deeply committed to public service and ensuring that immigration lawyers reach out to the most vulnerable immigrants through pro bono projects. Cyrus currently serves as the vice chair of the AILA's Ethics Committee. He's also a board member of the New York Immigration Coalition and a board member of Volunteers of Legal Services. Cyrus is also a special counsel on immigration matters to the Departmental Disciplinary Committee. He's the author of hundreds of articles on contemporary immigration topics, including ethics, and is ranked highly by Who's Who Legal. I'm not sure where he finds the time, but this world-renowned immigration lawyer is also a great violin player. Along with wife Lily, who plays the cello, and their children, Johan and Iana, we at ZAGNY can always count on all four of them to assist us at our musical events. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Cyrus D. Mehta. We will put them up, and I'm going to put them up here.
Okay, thank you. If I can get started while the PowerPoint is being set up, I'd like to thank ZAGNY for inviting me today. It is a great honor to present a lecture in honor of Kakashru, Irani, and the topic will be legal ethics in contemporary times. I'm going to first talk about the importance of legal ethics in our present times and why lawyers and other professionals must abide by an ethical code. I'll then relate legal ethics to the basic tenets of Zoroastrianism, the way I understand them, and how they've inspired me to successfully use them in my personal life and immigration practice. And finally, I will try to show how Zoroastrian tenets can inspire everyone to be ethical and successful. So let's first talk about lawyers. Thank you for the introduction, Khurshid. I'd like to basically first highlight how lawyers are perceived in the public. And even though I'm in the United States, this would apply to lawyers who practice in other countries where the audience is based. Lawyers have a high profile in society. It's hard to overestimate the coverage lawyers get in the media, television, and even in movies and fiction. At the same time, lawyers provide routine but important services like reviewing contracts, representing people in court, drafting wills, and handling the purchase of a home. Lawyers are also crucial in representing defendants in criminal proceedings, or in my field, immigrants in deportation proceedings. Lawyers are also at the forefront of advocacy movements involving advancing civil rights, environmental justice, reproductive rights, freedom of speech, among many other important issues of the day. And finally, lawyers easily cross into other walks of life, especially politics. Many presidents, prime ministers, and other great leaders have been lawyers. There was an important study of the American Bar Association conducted just under 20 years ago. And on the positive side, Americans found lawyers to be knowledgeable about the law, A majority of consumers who have hired lawyers were satisfied with the services of their lawyers. Consumers also found that the lawyer applied significant expertise and knowledge to their cases, identified practical solutions, and worked hard for their clients. And Americans also believed that lawyers are a good and respectable career. But there was also a negative side in the survey. Americans viewed lawyers as greedy, manipulative, and corrupt. Americans are also very uncomfortable with the connections that lawyers have with politics, the judiciary, government, big business, and law enforcement. And Americans also believe that lawyers do a poor job of policing themselves. From my personal standpoint, I do agree with everything. I won't challenge these assumptions, but I also would like to add that lawyers need to be providing more services, especially to poor and indigent clients all over the world. Everybody deserves good and competent representation, and that also needs to be fulfilled. So Shakespeare is known for this very famous line in Henry VI, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. And this was one of the lines repeated by one of the rebels who wanted to take over the throne. And so it could be viewed in two ways. Was Shakespeare referring to corrupt, unethical lawyers? Or was this a compliment to lawyers and judges who instill justice and order in society? Because by killing the lawyers, it would be easy for the rebels to take over. And so it may have been a compliment because lawyers keep the order in society. And I would like to view that interpretation of why Shakespeare said the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. All right, so even though, you know, there may be a negative perception on lawyers, and let me now come to the core of today's presentation. There are very important ethical rules governing lawyers. And contrary to the perception that lawyers are liars and manipulative, lawyers are required to be truthful. And let me just take you through some of the cardinal ethical rules that enjoin a lawyer to be honest and truthful. So the American Bar Association model rules provide these ethical rules for different states to adopt. And I'll just quickly go through some of the important rules that actually then will connect to our Zoroastrian tenets. So lawyers must be truthful under Rule 3.3. A lawyer cannot knowingly make a false statement of fact or law to a court and must correct a false statement when it is made to a court or tribunal. A lawyer has that important duty. And even if the lawyer unknowingly submitted something that was false and now comes to know about it, a lawyer is under a duty to remedy that, to remonstrate with the client, and even if necessary, disclose to the court if the client is not willing to withdraw that false evidence. Lawyers get disciplined if they don't follow Rule 3.3. It's a very cardinal rule. Even when dealing with third parties, lawyers must be truthful under Rule 4.1. A lawyer cannot knowingly make a false statement of matter of fact or law to a third person. And under Model Rule 1.2c, a lawyer shall not counsel a client to engage in criminal or fraudulent conduct. Although a lawyer can discuss the consequences of such proposed conduct, but a lawyer cannot encourage that sort of conduct from a client. It's very important that lawyers keep communications with their clients confidential. That's one of the cardinal rules. You have to keep information confidential. But there are exceptions to the rule. A lawyer is required to reveal information about a client if the lawyer believes it is necessary to prevent reasonably certain death or substantial bodily harm. A lawyer may also reveal information about a client if the client will be committing a crime or a fraud. So the lawyers don't have carte blanche authority to allow clients to do whatever they want, and they're bound by these very important ethical rules. Finally, the lawyer must maintain the integrity of the profession. The lawyer cannot engage in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation, or engage in conduct that is prejudicial to the administration of justice. And finally, a lawyer doesn't need to take every client. If you can decline representation if you don't believe in your client's values or objectives, or you find your client's policies or views repugnant. But even if you've taken on the representation, a lawyer can withdraw from the representation if the lawyer reasonably believes that the client is pursuing a course of conduct that is criminal or fraudulent, or the client insists upon taking action that the lawyer considers repugnant or with which the lawyer has a fundamental disagreement. So these are just, snapshots of ethical rules that really, provide this ethical code for a lawyer. And I'm speaking from my perspective as a lawyer, but I know all other professions also have their own ethical rules. And that's why to operate within the ethical rule is very important. Because the consequences can be very severe. Besides being disbarred or suspended or sanctioned, a lawyer can also go to jail for aiding a client in making false statements. So a lawyer cannot just hide behind the fact, oh, my client actually lied on this form. But if the lawyer knows that the client made a false statement, the lawyer will also be culpable for aiding and abetting a client. Lawyer could also be liable for conspiracy. And so the lawyer has to be very careful in establishing that the lawyer did not know that the client made a fraudulent statement or provided false evidence. Now let's get into real life. We're talking about legal ethics in contemporary times, and let's talk about famous lawyers being sanctioned for lying. And the most recent case is the case of Rudolf Giuliani. So Giuliani was at the apex of the legal profession. He was the US Attorney of the Southern District, and then he became the mayor of New York. He was New York's mayor during 9/11. And then most recently, he represented his client, Donald Trump. Especially with respect to trying to overturn the election on behalf of his client. Now, as a politician, you can get away with lies. And so his client, Trump, continues to persist and indicate that the election was a fraud and he was wrongly defeated and he should still be president. Now, Giuliani, as a politician, if he did that as part of Trump's circle, that would be okay. But Giuliani made a lot of representations on behalf of Trump in court and even in the public sphere. But Trump was his client. So now Giuliani operated as a lawyer rather than as a politician. And claims were made about dead people voting, illegal aliens voting in Arizona, the stuffing of ballots. And the New York Appellate Court suspended Giuliani. So right now, Giuliani is under a temporary suspension and basically under the ethical rules that I've cited in my PowerPoint. So Rule 3.3, where he knowingly made false statements to a court. He knowingly made false statements to third parties. And what he did was prejudicial to the administration of justice. Now, what's interesting is that Giuliani agrees that those statements were false. he now agrees that dead people did not vote. He agrees that 5 million illegal aliens in Arizona did not vote. That is not his contention. He's not saying that this is all true, like his boss, Trump. What Giuliani's defense at this point of time is that he did not know that these statements were false. He did not knowingly make these false statements. And that is what he's trying to defend himself against in these proceedings. So it remains to be seen whether Giuliani will finally emerge victorious or not. But I think the key issue again is, did he have knowledge that they were false or not? So he said he relied on, websites. He relied on statements put out by aides in the party. That's basically his defense. Right now, in the preliminary hearing, the court was not convinced. There were several instances in this 33-page judgment where the appellate court indicated that there's clear evidence that Giuliani knew that whatever statements he was making were fraudulent. But the proceedings are still continuing, and we shall see where this comes out. But this is a prime example of how a lawyer, who's also a famous politician, but a lawyer can get snagged for knowingly making false statements, not just to the court, but even in public, and doing things that prejudice the administration of justice. So I want to be bipartisan, and I want to talk about Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton is another famous lawyer who was our president over 2 terms, successful president. But Bill Clinton also got suspended from the Arkansas bar. That's where he was admitted. And then he resigned from the Supreme Court bar for lies under oath in the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Now, what's interesting is that Clinton lied about his affair with Monica Lewinsky during a civil lawsuit brought against him by Paula Jones. So Paula Jones made allegations of sexual harassment at one point of time, and that's what the case was about. And in the context of that case, the judge had ordered a deposition and discovery. And so Clinton had to testify in a deposition as part of that case. And in that deposition, Paula Jones's lawyers asked him about his affair with Monica Lewinsky, and Clinton blatantly lied and denied having an affair when it was clear that he lied. Now, the irony there is that even if Clinton told the truth, the case that Paula Jones brought against him would have still been dismissed. So what he said about Monica Lewinsky was irrelevant to the case that Paula Jones brought against him. But he lied, and therefore he was found by the Arkansas disciplinary authorities to have violated Rule 8.4D. He lied in violation of the discovery orders, and the same kind of rules applied to Clinton. Now, Clinton could potentially get reinstated, but I don't think he's ever cared to. I don't think he wants to be a practicing lawyer. And so Clinton is technically disbarred as of today. But these are 2 examples of famous lawyers who got into trouble for lying. And this is, these are just my pointers to all people, in every profession, not just lawyers. Never knowingly submit false evidence. Always have honest communications with your clients. Strive to be competent. Be diligent. Maintain client confidentiality. Avoid conflicts of interest. Charge reasonable fees based on the complexity of the matter and your reputation. Never cheat. Never steal. And do pro bono. So these are just certain pointers that I thought I would impart that should apply to all professionals, not just lawyers. So now, how does this all kind of tie into Zoroastrianism? And this part of the presentation is easy. I can talk about it in my sleep if I wanted to. I don't even need a PowerPoint. But now going into Zoroastrianism is where lies the challenge. But I think it was a it was a good challenge, and let me see how I can try to integrate these ethical rules into my understanding of Zoroastrianism. So the way I understand Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianism also enjoins that we all are fruitful. That's one of the cardinal tenets of our Zoroastrian faith. And it should inspire me and everybody else to be ethical, because we're always thinking about the truth. And I'll go into the various ways when we're always reminded about being truthful and being honest. So this is just my understanding of the doctrine, and I know there are many viewpoints. And Ahura Mazda is the creator, the master of Asha, that stands for order, righteousness, and justice. Ahura Mazda is the creator of all that's good. Ahura Mazda is opposed by an evil force, Ahriman or Angramenyu, that is not under his control. And Ahura Mazda is held by lesser divinities, especially the holy immortals or the Amesha Spentas, to combat this evil power. Humans are the good creation of Ahura Mazda and are bestowed with wisdom and the ability to discern between good and evil. And it is contemplated in Zoroastrian doctrine that humans, through their good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, will ultimately conquer evil, and good will ultimately prevail in the world. Now, I have said that there are different ways of looking at this. Some scholars have said that this is all in the mind. There may be no external forces, but the general principle here for everybody to learn from is that we are constantly in this struggle, and we have the ability to overcome evil and the lie, whether it's in your own mind or externally, but we have the ability to do that. We have the framework to do that. And we have the ability to do that by constantly thinking about good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And that is the key to the Zoroastrian doctrine. But there's also this ethical framework. And since we're talking about ethics, the Amesha Spentas, they may represent the 7 creations of Ahura Mazda, the good creations of Ahura Mazda, but they also represent certain attributes of the divinity. So Bahumana, one of the Amesha Spentas, stands for good purpose. Asha Vahishta, best righteousness. Spenta are mighty, holy devotion. Kshatriya Varya, the desirable dominion. Parvatat, linked to health. Amritat, long life or immortality. And the 7th divinity is Ahura Mazda, who stands for wisdom. Now, if you incorporate these attributes in your life, best righteousness, good purpose, devotion, health, long life, you can try to live a virtuous, happy life. So we do have this ethical framework within our religion to continue to be good and help people with good things and good actions. And if you're a lawyer, I use this framework to try to be a better lawyer and to stay out of trouble. So I have my ethical code under the ABA model rules, but I also have this ethical framework in the Zoroastrian religion that helps me and keeps me straight. The Ashembo prayer, is very, very inspiring, because it's all about truth and to be righteous for the sake of righteousness. And this particular translation resonated with me. Righteousness is best of all that is good. The radiant goal it is of life on earth. The light's attained when one lives righteously for the sake of the highest righteousness alone. And that's really the key. We do things, and even Faram Rose mentioned, we do things because for the sake of righteousness and for no other purpose. We're not doing it for any other purpose, but because it's good, because it's righteous, we do it. And that's what motivates us. And the Ashembo prayer is something that also provides a framework to be good, ethical, and virtuous. So now let me just try to kind of look at Rule 3.3 again in the context of Zoroastrian tenets. And this is just an experiment which I have tried to, do for this presentation. So again, a lawyer is prohibited from knowingly making a false statement to a tribunal. And the key is knowingly. And Giuliani's defense is that he did not know that this was not fruitful. And the question is, how does a lawyer know whether a client is fruitful or not? It's very hard to know. And sometimes it's very obvious, even if the client is lying, but the client says, well, actually, I did this, but this is, all outside the record, only you and I know. Now, you have knowledge that your client is not being fruitful. But there may be times when you have doubt or suspicion, and the question is, under the ethical rules, if you don't know for sure, you can still represent a client. But Zoroastrianism allows the lawyer to use the good mind, bahumana. So you can meditate and use wisdom to discern between what's true and what's not true. And then again, you can follow the path of asha, righteousness, in determining what's true, what's the lie. And you can try to use these concepts in the ethical framework of the Amesha Spenters to actually even practice law. For example, humans are the creation of our Mazda, and we are basically endowed with wisdom. We are endowed with the ability to do good acts and to aid in the battle with evil, and we have that framework, and we can use that to our betterment and to the betterment of all of society. So as I said, what's really unifying in our Zoroastrian doctrine, even if there may be different doctrinal viewpoints, is this concept of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. We have this in the Gathas, and we have that in later texts, but this is what actually unifies the entire Zoroastrian community. It's a great source of pride and provides an ethical framework to live a virtuous life. It also enables me as a lawyer to easily and seamlessly operate within the legal ethical framework. And I think, we as Zoroastrians should be very proud of what we have. We have a great legacy because Zoroastrianism is a great religion. Even though we are small in numbers, we go back into antiquity, and Zoroastrianism has influenced so many other things. So let's just quickly, so we came from the Indo-European people, and there are similarities in the Gathas and the Rig Veda, and this concept of asha, which is so primordial. Righteousness is also known as Rata in the Rig Veda, which stands for truth. So this whole thing came from the Indo-Europeans and then continued. And in my slide, I just kind of found something very interesting, that you can find similar words in Sanskrit and in Avestan. And they both kind of mean the one part is that of asha, all others are not parts. So you can actually find a lot of similarities between Sanskrit and Avestan. So we come from that tradition of the Indo-Europeans, and then we moved, and we have the Gathas, you have the Rig Vedas, but the concept of truth has continued in Hinduism, and it continues in Zoroastrianism, this whole concept of truth. And we should be very proud of this, that it came from our ancestors. Then Zoroastrian doctrine embodying a supreme God, the belief of a coming savior. The battle between good and evil was adopted by Jewish schools, which in turn influenced Christianity and even Northern Buddhism. So Zoroastrianism has also influenced Judaism and Christianity. And then I just thought I would talk about my namesake, King Cyrus, because King Cyrus, who was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, the great King Cyrus, was known to be a very tolerant king. And he freed the people enslaved by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. So he freed the Jews from Nebuchadnezzar and allowed them to practice their religion. And he said that he would return their various gods to their sanctuaries. And a notable inscription from the Cyrus cylinder reads, "I return them unharmed to their cells, the sanctuaries that make them happy." So the Cyrus cylinder is often referred to as the first charter of human rights. And it demonstrates that Cyrus was a tolerant king. And Cyrus was known to be a Zoroastrian. There was no direct evidence, but there are lots of aspects in his court, the fire altars. And then, of course, Darius and Xerxes after him clearly, invoked Ahura Mazda all the time. So Cyrus hopefully was influenced by Zarathustra's tenets. And that's why he was known to be this just king. And the Old Testament also reveres Cyrus because he permitted the Jews to return from exile and to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. And so Cyrus's influence continues even today because Thomas Jefferson was influenced by Xenophon's work, Cyropedia, which dwells on Cyrus as an ideal ruler. So it was not a historical account, but it dwelt on Cyrus the king, and then it was basically meditating about who the ideal ruler was, and Cyrus was the subject of Cyropedia. But Jefferson seemed to have been influenced by Cyropedia. Jefferson was also influenced by several biblical verses where one of them says to Cyrus, "He's my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasure," even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. So where are we coming to now? So we have Zoroastrianism that's, the concept of good radiated into the Gathas and down the ages, into the Rig Vedas and down the ages in Hinduism. Zoroastrianism has influenced Christianity and Judaism. And was Thomas Jefferson influenced by Cyrus? Now, Jefferson strongly believed that religion was a personal matter and should be free from government influence. Cyrus also had the same views. So for both Cyrus and Jefferson, tolerance was at the core of their approach towards governance, and it was also very practical. If you let people be and believe in their own religions, then you can have a more successful government, you can have a more successful country. And so this whole concept of this separation of church and state in the First Amendment of the US Constitution, this came from Jefferson. And I know it's speculation, but the question is, could Jefferson have been influenced by Cyrus, because he also separated church from religion. And he basically ruled over a very successful multinational empire, the Achaemenians. And this is just, so I wrote an essay in 2013, it was published in FEZANA. And most recently in the Congressional Record, a congressman in California tried to get the same notion into the Congressional Record that Zoroastrians have had an outsized influence. And I think there was some reference to Cyrus too. So it's just kind of worth mentioning. And I'm bringing this up because we should all feel very proud of our legacy and the fact that we should always be reminded that we have this great religion and legacy that motivates us to be honest and fruitful at all times. Finally, I'd like to now end my presentation because this is in honor of Dr. Irani. And Dr. Irani, I used to come to ZAGNY and I used to say hello to him. And the first thing that struck me was that he was an extremely humble person. He was so revered and respected, but he said hello to everybody. He even said hello to me. And even though I was a newcomer to ZAGNY when I first came, he talk to me, and so he was very unassuming. But what really struck me was that he was a brilliant philosopher, and the way his philosophical interpretation of the Gathas and Zarathustra's teachings, and the way he expounded on Asha and righteousness was magnificent. It was very inspiring, and this is what made me think about my presentation today and Asha, and it made me further research into what Asha and righteousness is all about. There's this very important interview that he did with Shariari some years ago, Domains of Belief. It's not about Zoroastrianism, but it's about his whole thinking about the world, about life, and it's really worth watching. It's very inspiring, and you can catch a glimpse of Professor Irani's brilliance. And as Farham Rose also said, that Professor Irani, notwithstanding your views on Zoroastrianism, he didn't believe in all the rigidities and the institutionalization of the religion, and he didn't care, who would be admitted or not. Anyone who believed in the Zoroastrian tenets was a Zoroastrian, according to him. So he spoke his mind. He spoke without fear, and there are. I think today, when we're talking about rights, and some people have equal, unequal rights, who can enter a fire temple, who can marry, whose children. And I think Professor Irani was beyond all that. He spoke to general principles. And I think that's something that's worthy of emulation. And ultimately, let me just end by saying that we are the beneficiaries of Zarathustra's noble teachings, and we all can choose to follow the path of righteousness, which in turn enables us to be fruitful, ethical, and successful. So thank you very much.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Are we okay? Yes, thank you for that amazingly inspiring talk. And now, folks, we will hold off the questions for Cyrus, since he has ended his talk bringing in his personal experiences with Katie. I would like to now invite some of our attendees to join in, to pay tribute, and to share their experiences with Professor Kakashru and Zoroastridism. So let's see, Roynton, are you there, Roynton, Fali, Nariman? We're going to have him join us. So folks, we're going to now hear from Edward Roynton, Fali, Nariman. Okay, we're trying to find him. It could be under Sanaya. Do you see Sanaya there, his wife? And while we find Roynton, let me tell you a little about this amazing Zoroastrian. There is a proverb in Farsi that if you want to prosper in life, follow the footsteps of your father. And Edward Justice Roynton Fali Nariman has done just that. Edward Roynton was ordained as a Zartusti priest at the age of 12 and had performed the Navjot of his sister Anaita before he was 15. Justice Nariman completed his Bachelor's of Law from Campus Law Center of the University of Delhi and then went to Harvard Law School for his Master's of Law. He has recently retired from the Indian Supreme Court, and at the time of his retirement, he was the second senior-most judge. In fact, he's only one of 4 judges to be elevated from bar to the bench. He's also an eminent lecturer on the subject of the Zartusti religion. Please join me in welcoming Edward Justice Roynton Fali Nariman, who is joining us from Shimla, I believe, Shimla, India, with his wife Sanaya, to pay tribute to our dear Kakashrow and Piroja, who he got to know when he was in New York many years ago. Roynton.
Good evening to you all. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this. I was very, very close to Kakashrow. In fact, I studied at the Harvard University. I did my LLM there in 1980-81 and then came to New York. And when I came to New York, one of the first people I met was Kakashrow. Kakashrow struck me as being like some German professor, like somebody out of Heidelberg University. He had that delightful look. And apart from his delightful look, he was a delightful human being. He wore his greatness very lightly. He was such a darling of a man that I interacted with him at least 12 to 14 times in that 1 year that I was in New York. Let me tell you now a little about the Kakashrow that I knew so well. I don't think he has ever left all of us. You remember the great lines of Samuel Butler, "Yet meet we shall, and part and meet again, where dead men meet on the lips of living men." As a matter of fact, there are three facets of Kakashrow which strike one after one comes to know him. The first, most obvious one is Kakashrow and Zoroastrianism. Now, he was a purist in the sense that, being a philosopher, he looked at the Gathas and only the Gathas. He didn't look at the younger Avesta. He didn't look at the Pahlavi texts. And I remember the one thing that he drilled into everybody who met him. He said Zoroaster's religion basically was a universal one. He lifted a tribal faith into a universal faith. And how did he do it? He did it by dividing mankind and womankind into two halves, black and white, like the twin spirits that were created by Ahura Mazda. He always emphasized the fact that they were twins, that is exactly alike in every way. The only difference was the choice that they made, and the choice was an ethical one. So the first thing that struck one about Kakashrow was the fact that he was a great philosopher. He looked to the philosophical part of the religion and exhorted everybody to be like Spenta and not Angara Maini. I remember he was very kind, and I was reintroduced to my religion by Barzo Taraporwala's gift to me when I was at Harvard, namely Eric Taraporwala's book, The Religion of Zarathustra. I then delved deep into the faith. And one of the things I wanted to borrow was Jackson's Avestan grammar, which was then not available. Kakashrow went out of his way and somehow or the other got it out of the Columbia reading room for 2 days. And I made copious notes, I remember, at the time. Another very interesting thing that he did was he joined us at our invitation for my younger daughter Khurshid's Navjot at New Delhi. Nobody will forget the delightful lecture that he gave just after the Navjot, telling people, and there were all sorts there. There were Hindus, there were Muslims, there were Parsis, of course, as to what exactly the Navjot meant and how important it was for a child to essentially choose to become a Zoroastrian. So this tells us about Kakashrow and Zoroastrianism. We now come to Kakashrow and music. I am extremely fond of Western classical music, as was Kakashrow. And we spent many a convivial evening discussing composers, conductors, etc. I remember his telling us that Mahler's Third Symphony was the one work which he never missed. Now, I agree with him entirely that Mahler's Third Symphony was perhaps the greatest of the 9. But he said he never missed it. And every time there was a performance in New York, wherever it was, he went to it. Another interesting thing he told me was that he had seen many conductors, but he had seen nobody gyrate like Dimitri Mitropoulos, who was a Greek great conductor. Apparently, he had a photographic memory. It was so fantastic that even Toscanini was known for his memory. When asked to conduct Berg's Lulu, Berg was an Austrian composer, and Lulu was one of our modern day works. He said, no, I can't memorize this, go to Mitropoulos. Two other things which he did was, he gave me 2 videos which I treasure very much. One of Elena Stieber, who was a diva at the Metropolitan Opera, and one of the great Japanese violinist Midori, whose debut at Carnegie Hall was nothing short of spectacular. She played the Richard Strauss Sonata, among many other things. And now to Kakashru, the philosopher. He actually showed me, and I hope that letter is preserved, the letter by Albert Einstein recommending him to the City College, where he was ultimately appointed and taught for so many years. It was terrible to see dear Piroja in a paralyzed state after I came back to the United States. Here again, Kakashru, the philosopher, prevailed. Kakashru very sweetly and disarmingly told me, she has looked after me all her life. It is now my turn to look after her. I don't think anybody who has come across this man will not describe him in superlative terms. He was a darling of a human being. I will remember him till I die, and I'm sure that all of you will remember him till all of you die and pass the message on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Roynton, for this very touching tribute. I believe that letter that you spoke about, or that handwritten note, is MIA, actually. That's what
it is there.
it is.
It is there.
It is there. I mean, if it was, if we had cell phones and all at that time, I'm sure, Roynton, you would have taken a snapshot when he showed it to you. But yes, thank you. Our next speaker, so from India, we are going to now come to the East Coast, and we will be joined by Dina Mcintyre. Zan, do we have Dina? So let me talk and introduce our good friend Dina, who was a great fan of Piroja and Kakashru for many years. Prior to her retirement, Dina practiced law for almost 40 years in Pennsylvania, for most of the time in partnership with her husband. Dina shared Piroja's and Kakashru's love for Zarathustra's teachings, which she thinks, like most of us, are absolutely life-transforming. So friends, please join me in welcoming Dina Mcintyre.
Thank you, Khurshid. Thank you. Piroja and Kakashru were like two sides of the same coin. Piroja was a lawyer with a fine reputation who practiced law in India before she and Kakashru emigrated to the United States. Kakashru, as we all know, was a professor of philosophy who at one time hobnobbed with Einstein. They both combined intelligence and kindness, a rare combination. They were among my favorite human beings. They lived Zarathustra's teachings. I loved to hear Kakashru lecture on Zarathustra's teachings, which he often did at the conferences at which I attended. And he did it with his fine sense of humor. He exemplified the Jasamaya Vanke Mazda prayer with the goodness of his thoughts, words, and actions, which made him valued by those whose lives he touched. One of his students in later life gave $5 million to the City University of New York, where Kakashru taught for many years, to endow a chair in Kakashrow's name. One can only imagine the impact Kakashrow must have made on that young student's life for him to have so honored his professor. Multiply that by the thousands of students he taught who did not have $5 million and the many other lives that he and Piroja touched around the world, and we begin to glimpse what a force for good they were. In the early years in North America, when Zoroastrian communities were troubled by divisive issues, time and again, without sacrificing his integrity, I saw how Kakashrow helped to bring about good solutions, removing quarrels, persuading opposing sides to lay down their weapons of anger and enmity. In fact, he became a legend worldwide that lifted our hearts. Piroja did not teach in a university. She taught in the School of Life, where I learned some valuable lessons from her. She exemplified the Jasamaya Vange Mazda prayer, not only with the goodness of her thoughts, words, and actions, but also by giving of herself generously, joyfully, without fanfare. Along with many of her friends, in 1,001 small, practical, day-to-day ways, she and they were the unsung heroes who helped to make ZAGNY a reality. She told me stories about her experiences with a mischievous sense of humor. And when she came to visit me, she brought an almond confection, badam pak, that was to die for. A public relations expert would have labeled Piroja a lawyer, a community builder, a fine raconteur, and a chef worthy of public television. But to her friends and Kakashrow, Piroja did not need PR, because in truth, she was the wind beneath Kakashrow's wings. She enabled him to soar. They were a team. We are so lucky that they were a part of our lives for so many years. I cherish their memory. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Dina. So folks, from India to Pennsylvania, and now off we go to London. Arzan, can you find Rusi? We now will have Rusi Kekobad Dalal, who's joining us from London. Rusi was born in Zanzibar, where he spent his schooling days. He then went to India for further studies, and then further off to London for his professional engineering qualifications. Rusi met his wife Roshan in London, and they got married in '61. Congratulations. After the revolution in Zanzibar, Rusi could not return and settled down in London. Since then, he has established a successful engineering career in the United Kingdom. Rusi's profound interest in the Zoroastrian community service got him to know Katie and Piroja. Currently, Rusi is serving as a senior trustee of the Zoroastrian Trust Funds of Europe. And folks, please join me in welcoming Rusi as he pays tribute to Kakashru and Piroja.
Thank you, Khurshid. First and foremost, I want to congratulate the likes of Farmers Patel and Khurshid Navdar and others who had conceptualized this perpetual memorial for Professor Kaikhosrow Irani and his wife Piroja. I also thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to pay my tribute to this great personality on behalf of the Zoroastrians of the United Kingdom. outside of United Kingdom, outside of the United States of America, Professor Irani is mostly renowned for his study and scholarship of the Zoroastrian religion. One has only got to go through his books and writings to admire his understanding of the Holy Gathas and appreciate the depth of the knowledge that he possessed. I recall meeting Professor Irani in 1993 during his visit to London, where he delivered a eloquent talk at a Gatha colloquium. During my presidency of the ZTFE at the end of the Second World Zoroastrian Youth Congress in 1997, the School of Oriental African Studies, known as SOAS over here, announced a commitment to re-establish the defunct study of Zoroastrianism. This move was instigated by Professor Mary Boyce and Professor John Hinnels. Both of them were well known to Kakashru Irani. This aspect was fulfilled at the behest of Zartosi brothers Nariman and Faridun, who offered a financial support for such an educational venture. Having successfully contracted to deal with SOAS to commence Zoroastrian studies, Nariman suggested to me to invite Professor Irani to address the very first batch of students that were enrolled at different levels of learning at SOAS. I remember Professor Irani inspiring the students with vigor and passion to infuse the study of Zoroastrianism into them. He motivated his listeners with his command of knowledge on Zoroastrianism, which he displayed with passion and clarity. With further donations from the estates of Mary Boyce, a chair in Zoroastrian studies at SOAS as part of the University of London became a reality and got established. Further generous donations of £5 million from the Shapoorji Pallonji Foundations has firmly institutionalized Zoroastrian studies at SOAS with international recognition. However, it will remain a historical fact that the seeds that have germinated into phenomenal achievement for SOAS can only be attributed to the pep talk that Professor Irani delivered to the first batch of enthusiastic students who have now blossomed into their careers into Zoroastrianism. And this would not have been possible and would have been lost. This is how I remember Professor Irani and his contribution in the United Kingdom. I remember my own visits earlier to the Darbe Mer in the old New York, old Darbe Mer in New York, where I recall having met Professor Irani and Piroja, and of course another name I met, Eresh Munshi. I have also got the privilege of visiting your new Darbe Mer with great pride and joy. I understand that Professor Irani was also a philosopher, and of course he is endowed, like she said, $5 million to the City College, and that endowment is again a very Zoroastrian tradition of giving with happiness, and that is what Professor Irani has done. I'm pleased to note that eminent speakers of Cyrus Mehta, whom I happen to know as well, have come forward to keep alive the legend and legacy of this great soul of Kaikhosrow Irani. This can only be of great inspiration to all of us. May this remembrance meetings last forever. We Zoroastrians from the United Kingdom can only wish you well in all your endeavors. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Rusi. And our last friend of Kakashru is joining us nice and bright and early on Saturday morning from California. Please help me in welcoming Mayor Borzine Sarushian. Mayor, have we found him, our son? Mayor was born in Kerman, Iran. He completed his schooling at the Zoroastrian schools in Kerman, got his undergraduate studies at the University College of London, and then came to the US in 1975 to pursue his PhD at UCLA. The Islamic Revolution of 79 led him and his wife, Mayor Banu Zoroastri, to settle in the US. And they now live in San Diego and have been there for the last 25 years. Besides his professional work in telecommunication engineering, he has had a lifelong interest in Zoroastrian studies, and that is how he met Professor and Firoja, and he will tell us a little about his experiences. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nader, and thanks to Fromroos and the rest of ZAGNY for hosting this remembrance. It was a very insightful lecture that we got from Cyrus, and it was very informative. And it's nice, always nice to see Dina and Rusi and everybody else. My acquaintance with Firoja and Kaikhosrow Irani came about in the late 80s and early 90s when my family and we lived in Central Jersey, and we used to go to the ZAGNY classes every month, Sunday classes, and while there, usually Kaikhosrow had a lecture for the adults, which I always joined. And I found the education that I got from that interaction with Kaikhosrow and Firoja very, very valuable. It really helped me gain a better appreciation of the Zoroastrian philosophy and religion. So that continued, and even after I left for the West Coast, I used to, every time I went to the East Coast, I used to stop by and visit with Kaikhosrow and Firoja if the opportunity arose. Growing up in Iran in the late, in the 1960s, and I had heard of Dinsha Irani, Kaikhosrow's father, quite a few times. Dinsha Irani, his grandfather, had fled from Iran to India, and he had reason to position of prominence. And at the time, he had published a number of books. This was a very dynamic time in Iran with Reza Shah Pahlavi and the interest in ancient Iran. He had published a number of books. One was titled The Culture of Ancient Iran, and the other one, The Philosophy of Ancient Iran, which was well read. There were not too many books at that time on ancient Iran, so these books were very welcome. And also, Dinsha Irani had led a delegation of prominent Parsis at the invitation of the government of Iran to visit Iran. Included in that delegation at the suggestion of Dinsha Irani was Rabindranath Tagore, who had also been invited to come to Iran. And they met with Reza Shah, and it was a very successful visit. And Dinsha met with a lot of the intellectuals at the time who were later to be very influential in reintroducing Iranians to ancient Iran. Some time ago, I came across a telegram that had been sent, text of a telegram, not a telegram, that was published from the Muslim League to the Reza Shah's court when the news came about that Tagore was also being invited to come to Iran, and they were protesting that why is this man included because of his religion. And of course, Reza Shah would have nothing to do with that. So Tagore came, and that was a very successful visit. Kaikhosrow told me a few stories about his father, and Cyrus was mentioning about pro bono. So if I may just mention one of them, is that there was a Irani refugee who had settled in India, and he had built a business and was very successful in and purchased some land. And then later the municipality, as the city expanded, was trying to annex that. So he went to Dinsha Irani, who represented him at the lower court, and unfortunately they ruled in favor of the municipality, so they appealed that to the upper court in Delhi, and that wasn't successful. At that point, the client had decided to give up. But then Shah Irani said, no, we should pursue that. And the last resort was to appeal this to the Privy Council in London and the context of colonial India. And the client said, well, I really cannot afford to go to London. So then Shah Irani purchased 3 tickets for himself, for the client, and for Kaikhosrow. And they sailed to India, where he presented the case to England, and the ruling was in their favor. So after they returned, the client was so happy, he was willing to give half of the land that was recovered to Din Shah Irani, but Din Shah said, no, don't give it to me, donate it to the association, so they can do something with it. The lesson learned from Kaikhosrow and his father, which we can obviously take away, is, first of all, excellence, dedication to excellence, finding the truth. Secondly, dedication to helping other people, and with a mixture of humility, which they manifested. And I think that's the best tribute I can pay to them. Once again, thank you for hosting this event. It was very informative. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mayor. And might I add that not much has changed. Thanks to our Dean of Religious Classes, who's right here with us, Lavji Kama, and to our Edward Parvez Patel, and our amazing young parents who take the initiative to volunteer. Our monthly religious classes are still alive and well. And before the pandemic, we would typically have about 75 to 100 little kids and their parents every single month here at our Darimera. And we look forward to bringing them all back once we're all vaccinated and boosted. So I would like to once again thank all 4 Friends of Kakashru, and actually to Framros Patel for conceiving this idea of inviting the Friends of Kakashru from all over the world to pay their tribute. Friends, I'm sure some of you have questions for Cyrus, but if we can take a few more minutes, we have several faculty from City College here today. And I am going to now invite the archivist, Sydney Van Noort. Sydney, are you here? And if Sydney can be allowed to share her screen. Sydney is going to give us an overview of where the library collection archiving process is. To tell you a little about Sydney, Sydney received her BA from Vassar and her master's in library science from Columbia University. She is the author of The City College of New York, a book that was published in 2007. Sydney is also being joined by her colleagues, Jerry Beersdorf and Tabor Hollingsworth, who have helped her in pull together a little PowerPoint, which will tell us the timeline of where they have come and what is yet to be done. So Sydney, take it away.
Very good. Okay. Okay, so slides. And look at my slideshow from the beginning. And right, well, anyway, so here we are with our announcement of the Professor Kakashru D. Irani Archival Collection at the Archives and Special Collections Division of the City College Morris R. Cohen Library. And I've been helped by my stalwart staff, Jerry W. Beersdorf II and Tabor Hollingsworth. Jerry is pursuing a degree in library science at the Queen's College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies, and Mr. Hollingsworth is a master's degree candidate at the Craig Newmark School of Journalism at CUNY. Professor Irani was beloved for many years at City College and was honored in 2012 by the Alumni Association after he had been teaching for 61 years, including service as chair of the philosophy department for 9 years. Dr. Martin Tamney, class of 1955, honored Professor Irani with the $2 million gift to City College for a fellowship program and an endowed professorship currently held by Professor Massimo Pigliucci of the philosophy department. The materials were delivered in December of 2018 from the estate. The personal papers and artifacts delivered to the archives and the personal library to the library, Morris R. Cohen Library. Since the spring of 2021, the archive staff have scanned 120 documents constituting over 1,400 pages of material, including academic essays, lectures, letters, and postcards, ranging from the tea country in India to an envelope of Kodiak slide film. Numerous art objects and artifacts were photographed. Currently, we've weeded it down to 31 boxes in total, 11 of which are designated for the art objects, like the awards, statues, and ceramics. 6 of the 20 remaining boxes have been processed, containing an extensive library of his correspondence between Professor Irani and his colleagues, as well as academic and philosophic texts. And here are some of the artifacts and art mementos. The contents of the collection are expansive and is applicable for researchers in Zoroastrian studies, Iranian studies, and the philosophy of science, epistemology, religion, and the history of India and Iran, the history of City College and CUNY, and the history of the Farsi and Zoroastrian communities in North America. These are examples of some of the cultural and scientific journals. And here, seen on the left, is the epistemological letters, a kind of privately printed journal by physicists. And our research has determined that there is only one other library in the world which has copies of this particular journal. So it's extremely unique. And showing the process of scanning the materials, Mr. Tabor Hollingsworth has been the person primarily executing the task of scanning, digitizing these materials, one page by page. While physically organizing the materials in the collection, the archive staff are classifying Professor Irani's materials in a program, a platform, Jstor Forum, so that future researchers can access and navigate the collection remotely. The archive staff are working to improve the conditions of storage by preserving, cataloging, and cleaning the collection of duplicates with the goal of streamlined and long-term use by future researchers. And just to give you an idea of what the Jstor Forum platform looks like. On the left is the administrative side of the program, whereby the documents are uploaded and categorized and described. And then what happens is that the program becomes published, and this is going to be a public access collection. And on the right, you have an example of one of our publicly accessible collections from the City College archives, the CCNY anti-war notices of 1934 to 1936. So this is an example of what the public will be able to access. And these items will be downloadable and be usable for educational research purposes. So it'll be full access. After organizing and scanning, a finding aid will be developed in archive space to aid researchers And here are some of these remaining materials ready for processing. And this is the resource archive space for City College library use, and showing you the basic organization of the Kakashru and Irani papers collection and how it's being organized in different categories. And then ultimately a finding aid will be produced from this data entered in this resource. And now we have some examples of some of the historic, some photographs that came with the collection, where he was a member of the French Literary Union in December of 1940, with other faculty at the St. Xavier's College, 1940-41, where he taught. And people spoke earlier about his father, Jstor Irani, with his wife, so his parents, and the young Kakashru Irani. And another photograph from his college days, perhaps, but the kind of photograph that we need help with in terms of identifying the people in the photograph, if at all possible. And we are actively seeking and reaching out to friends, colleagues, for assistance in terms of providing additional background information about the documents and materials in this collection so we can catalog them as accurately as possible. And of course, there are tributes to the lifelong partners, Kakashru and Piroja, seen here in enjoying days of good health in cruises and other occasions where they were feted for their many accomplishments. And a picture of him at the City College Great Hall, where he was feted with a 90th birthday party in 2012. And just to let you know that if you have additional questions and if you wish to reach out, my email is there. And also Khurshid P. Navdar from Hunter College has also agreed to field questions and collect information for the project. So if you wish to pursue other questions or provide answers about some of the resources here, we would be glad to hear from you. So thank you very much for allowing me to follow up and explain how we are carefully nurturing the legacy of Professor Irani and making it available to the world at large. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sydney. Again, thanks, Sydney, Jerry, and Tabor. I also wanted to express my gratitude to Daisy Dominguez, who was overseeing this project. And she was the interim associate dean and chief librarian at City College. And now we look forward to working with Professor Lon Mendelsohn as he takes over and we continue. So thank you. Now, folks, if you have any questions, we will take questions for Cyrus at this time. And if you all can please put them in the chat box. Cyrus would love to answer your questions. Arzan, do we have questions coming into the chat box? Okay, we are just opening the chat box. So please take some time. And Cyrus, if you can come up, I am sure there will be questions from our folks. And then we will be winding up in a few minutes. All right.
So if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them. Any questions coming up? I know the chat box has just opened and it's hard for people to just kind of formulate their thoughts.
Cyrus, I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned about the Zoroastrian influence on Judaism, Christianity, and even Buddhism. How about Muslim Islam religion? Was there any reference? Could you educate us about how Islam was influenced by Zoroastrianism?
The whole notion of one God, the good and evil, heaven and hell, a savior, that started with Zoroastrianism, and that influenced Judaism, Christianity, and in turn, Islam. So that's basically my answer. If you read books, there are chapters on how each of these religions have been influenced. For example, Zoroastrian tapestry has chapters on this, and even Mary Boyce and many other scholars. So, but I think the key issue is that this whole notion of one supreme God, heaven and hell, a savior that will come in the end, these are very common to all the faiths. And at the same time, Zoroastrianism has influenced Hinduism, but in a different way. This was before everything started. In the Indo-Iranian times, these concepts of the same gods, were worshipped by both the Indians and the Iranians. And then, of course, Ahura Mazda got this exalted status in Iran, and you had Indra and other gods in the Hindu religion. But the key issue is that this notion of truth just kept on permeating through the ages.
There's another question. Is there any hard evidence that Cyrus too was a Mazda? If yes, what is it? Repeat the question.
Is there, I can't read the question, but is there any evidence?
Is there any evidence that, is there any hard evidence that Cyrus II was a Mazda Yasni? And if yes, what is it?
Okay, so the only evidence that I was able to, when I was writing my essay on how Cyrus may have influenced the Constitution, was there were fire altars in his palace, and they were basically set up in a way that Zoroastrians would set them up in order to pray before the fire. And so that's one piece of evidence that we have that he may have believed in Zoroastrianism and practiced Zoroastrianism. But clearly his descendant, Darius Xerxes, they explicitly made references to Ahura Mazda all the time.
Then there's a follow-up comment from Mehta, who says that Prophet Muhammad had a personal tutor who was a Zoroastrian priest. Dina Mcintyre has a comment saying, "Dear Cyrus, I enjoyed the way you related the rules of professional conduct to the real life situations." And then Roshan Retna wants to share an interesting anecdote from an article about KD in the FEZANA journal. So Roshan Aunty, we'll unmute you and bring you up. 1 second. Yeah, Roshan Aunty, unmute yourself and you can talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Everyone. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to show you a picture from FEZANA journal where Kakashru is in the picture. This is early when he arrived in 1947 at the Gansak dinner at Wadia's Raja restaurant in New York in 1947. So here's Kakashru in the picture. And then this is from the Immigration to USA issue of FEZANA journal. It's a nice article about how Kakashru first came to USA. It says, on landing at the docks in San Francisco, he remembers filling out a number of lengthy and incomprehensible forms, such as not engaged in any activity leading to the violent overthrow of the US, and not engaged in prostitution, etc. At the entry for race, neither Kakashru nor the immigration officer could quite agree, since he wasn't clearly Caucasian, though his ancestors did come from near the Caucasus Mountains in Persia, nor Indian, nor brown, nor black. In the end, the officer wrote other and permitted him to enter the country. So it's a long article, and if you're interested, it's in the spring '97 issue of FEZANA Journal. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Zareen Karani has a question. Cyrus, what ethical guidelines from Zoroastrianism do you feel are most relevant to pass on to our children to feel inspired to continue the ethical legacy of our religion in the current times, especially in the United States?
Yeah, so, we all know about good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, and that's on our lips all the time. But I think we can go beyond that. We can teach our children to go beyond good thoughts, words, and deeds. And they can be taught about how Zoroastrianism was the first environmental religion. And again, we go back to our 7 Amesha Spentas. Each one looks after one of the creations of Ahura Mazda. They're in charge of the earth, the water, the fire, the sky. And we have very elaborate prayers to propitiate, not them as spirits, but to think about the creations. And so I think our children can feel very proud of the fact that Zoroastrianism is an environmental religion, and you incorporate environmentalism as well as truths into your daily life, and that can be instilled in children. I also think that it's also important to kind of because we are a religion, we also have prayers, and I believe that prayers recited by Zarathustra in times of antiquity that have come down, hopefully have gained a lot of steam, over the millennia, and hopefully will have power. So if you believe in prayer, our prayers are very ancient, especially the Yatharvarya prayer, the Ashembo prayer, and just saying those will be important. And finally, the whole concept of fire, we put a lot of importance on fire, and fire is a symbol of truth, the ultimate truth, because everything becomes pure in fire. So to meditate before a fire and to say prayers before a fire can be very beneficial. So you basically can meditate on some of the quandaries of the day. So you have your ethical framework, you can intellectually think about truth and what is honesty, but you can also get inspiration through the prayers and through meditation and through meditating before fire.
I have one last question, if I can, Arzan, for Cyrus. So Cyrus, as you look back to your illustrious, successful career, is there anything that you'd have done differently? And what are your words of wisdom to youngsters who are looking into joining this profession?
Looking back at it, I don't think I would have done anything differently. I love being a lawyer. I love being an immigration lawyer because I love helping people and using the law to help people. And as Professor Irani said, that he was confronted with those questions about, are you going to overthrow the government? Those questions continue to remain, and they become even more incomprehensible today. The immigration law, all laws have become very complicated. And I think the ability to kind of interpret them and then explain them in a simple way to people, and to use the law to bring about change to help people in their lives is very inspirational. And I think I will hopefully not want to do anything else. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Thank you again. And I'm going to now have our Arzan Samwadia, President of FEZANA, to come and provide his concluding remarks. And actually, Arzan, while you talk, I'll try to pull up that video if we can show, and I'll see if we can do that. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. This is, in many ways, it's a momentous event because it's also the first time after a long pandemic that we are actually having an event at the Daramer. This Daramer in 2016 was inaugurated by Professor Kakashru Irani. There could have been no other better person to do that. And listening to what Cyrus spoke today, I think it is evidently clear that we all belong and practice a religion that offers, a moral and ethical code in whatever we do in life, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a businessman, whether you're a doctor, in any profession and in anything that you do. I think the religion provides you a moral compass and ethical guideline to follow. And I think that's something that was also Professor Irani's legacy. He lived his life that way. He taught us and inspired a lot of us, many people in this room who knew him intimately and personally. So I think that's something that we will all take away from that. Yeah, I don't know if you all noticed, but over there, there is one artifact from Professor Irani that remains with us here at ZAGNY. This was the actual trunk that he had on this ship that brought him to America the first time. And this was in his apartment all of these years. And then when when his estate was passed on, a lot of these artifacts are either at ZAGNY or they are at FIRES, which is the National Archives for FEZANA, for want of a better word, in Houston. So whenever you get a chance to come to the Daramer, come to the library and you'll actually see this trunk over there. And I would also like to conclude by saying that the next Professor Irani Memorial Lecture will be at the next World Congress in New York next July. The keynote address will be the Professor K.D. Irani Memorial Lecture. And so this is an opportunity for all of you to make sure that you plan your calendars and be there with us. And at that time, ZAGNY and FEZANA are going to welcome the Zartusti world to New York. And you will also, all of those from all around the world will also have an opportunity to come to the Daramer and to visit the Daramer. And in that, I would request the ZAGNY, the IZA, and the DMZT boards that we need to have a more fitting remembrance to Professor Irani instead of just having his photograph on an easel. So I think we have 8 months to go. The challenge is up to the 3 boards who run DMZT, ZAGNY, and IZA. Let's make it happen so that when we welcome people who come to the World Congress to also come to ZAGNY, we have a permanent remembrance place for Professor Irani. With this, I thank everybody for attending this event. Thank you to Framrose, to Cyrus, and to everybody else who organized this, all of the amazing people at CCNY. And we hope to see you all again at the next Professor Irani Memorial Lecture on July 1st, 2022 at the World Congress in New York. Thank you.
So Arzan, if you can just share thank you so much, Arzan, and we will certainly work on that for next year. Folks, if you could just bear with me for a minute, I'm going to try and show you a beautiful clip that was shot by the Kurds on the 10th day of Professor Irani's passing away. So I'm going to try. Farzeen Patel was very instrumental in helping us find this clip. And if I'm able to share my screen, I would love to show that and share that with you. So bear with us. Yes, we have definitely overshot our time here by a few minutes, but I am going to share my screen and see if we can. Okay. Do you see this? Alrighty, I'm going to raise the volume. I don't think there is much with volume, but just It's a very powerful little, okay. So here again, on the 10th day after his passing, the Kurds pay respect.
This is in independent Kurdistan on the 10th day ceremony.
A rose and a beautiful picture of Professor Irani being floated in the water as they all say goodbye to their dear friend. All right, thank you all again for joining us. Perfect. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Take care and be well. I again want to thank Fromrose, and I also want to actually take a second to thank Zareen Vale, and to offer our sincere condolences to her on her untimely loss. And we will definitely have her with us next year as we plan this 5th annual lecture. Thank you everyone for joining us. Take care and be well.
Thank you.